He called Clara one more time, not to revisit the confession. That chapter was closed. He had one remaining question, and it was a simple one. He asked if she still had her photography archive from 5 years ago, the work from her early freelance period, the events, the gallery openings. She did. She brought her hard drive to the apartment the following morning. She set it on the desk, and Julian sat down in front of it, and she stood slightly behind him and to the left, the way a person stands when they are no longer sure what role they are playing in a room. He found the Galleria Rossi folder in under a minute. 47 images from the opening night, 18 months ago. He scrolled through them slowly. The canapes, the crowd, the art on the walls that he had not understood but had smiled at anyway because Sandra had been standing beside him explaining it, and he had been watching her more than the paintings. He stopped on image 31. A wide shot of the entrance hall, taken from the upper mezzanine. The kind of candid frame a photographer takes to establish the room before closing in on faces. In the foreground, a cluster of guests. In the background, near the door, 2 figures caught mid-conversation. Sandra, and a man beside her. Julian leaned forward. He expanded the image. The pixelation softened the detail, but not enough to matter. The man beside Sandra at the entrance of the Galleria Rossi on the night she had supposedly walked into Julian's life by chance was Marco. Julian sat with that for a moment. Marco, who had told Julian he hadn't met Sandra until Julian introduced them at dinner 4 months into their relationship. Marco, who had sat across from him at lunch 3 weeks ago and said he'd seen her with someone, and she didn't look like a woman thinking about her vows. Marco, who had suggested the Milan trip. Julian closed the image. He thanked Clara. He walked her to the door. He came back to the desk and sat in the quiet for a long time, completely still. The way a man sits when the last piece has dropped into place and the picture it forms is worse than anything he had allowed himself to imagine. He rebuilt the timeline from the beginning, not from when he first noticed something was wrong, from the very start. Marco had known Sandra and Luca before Julian ever met either of them. At some point, the exact timing no longer mattered. Marco had connected their debt problem to Julian's assets and seen an opportunity. He had facilitated Sandra's introduction to Julian at the gallery. He had let the relationship develop, let the engagement happen, let the wedding approach. And then, when his own quiet negotiations to exit their joint company had reached a stage where he needed Julian off balance and distracted, he walked into the restaurant and set down his fork and said, "I've seen her, Jules, twice now, with someone." Not to protect Julian, to detonate him. A man in the middle of a romantic collapse, blindsided, grieving, publicly humiliated, was not a man who read buyout terms carefully, was not a man who held firm on valuation, was not a man who called 3 independent advisors before signing anything. Marco had not been the friend who finally told the truth. Marco had been the architect of the entire thing, pulling the pin at the precise moment it served him most. He hadn't stayed silent to protect himself. He had stayed silent because the plan required Julian to fall first. Julian said nothing to anyone. For 4 days he was impeccably, deliberately ordinary. Sandra sent him a photo of the cake. 3 tiers, pale ivory, a detail of pressed sugar flowers along the base. He replied that it was perfect. She sent venue confirmations and a question about whether his uncle preferred chicken or fish. He answered both. He signed off on the rehearsal dinner seating plan without a word of objection. Marco texted about the Rika account on Thursday afternoon. Julian replied within the hour with clean, professional clarity, 2 action points and a suggested timeline. Marco sent back a thumbs up. 11 years of partnership reduced to a thumbs up. Internally, Julian was building the opposite of chaos. His lawyer had the exit terms ready, Marco's share buyout, priced at full fair market value, not a cent of leverage applied. He had drafted a private letter to Sandra's family, factual and brief, to be delivered after the rehearsal dinner. He had confirmed with the venue that the evening would proceed exactly as planned. He had made one last request to himself, that he feel nothing until it was time, and, remarkably, he had kept it. Julian internally. I didn't run the test to punish anyone. I ran it to know the truth. Now I know. And so tonight, everyone else will too. The night before the rehearsal dinner, Julian sat alone in the apartment. The camera was still in the corner. He had never taken it down. He looked at it for a moment, the small eye blinking red in the dark, and then he opened his laptop one final time and pulled up the recording. He didn't watch the footage, he only listened. Sandra's voice caught from a rooftop above, slightly distant, completely clear. "Julian is security. You are the rest of my life." He listened to it once. Then he closed the laptop. He set his phone to charge. He turned off the lamp, and he lay down. He slept deeply, without interruption, for the first time since Milan, because the heaviest thing in the world is not grief. Grief, at least, has edges. You know where it begins and where, eventually, it ends. The heaviest thing is the moment just before clarity arrives, the suspension, the not yet knowing that sits on your chest at 3 in the morning and has no name and no cure and no logical endpoint. That weight had lifted now. What remained was simply what needed to be done. Julian Vance closed his eyes. The city moved outside his window, indifferent and continuous. The camera blinked in the corner, red and steady, keeping watch over an empty room. Tomorrow, the test results would be delivered. Not to him. He already had his results. To everyone else. He had spent 3 years building a life with someone. It had taken her 18 months to build her way into it. The difference, he now understood, was only one of them knew exactly what they were constructing.
The venue was everything Sandra had wanted it to be. Candlelight on white linen. Both families arranged around a long table. Her mother, her sister, Julian's parents, his aunt. Marco at the far end in a dark jacket, laughing at something Julian's father had said. The room smelled of gardenias and warm bread and the specific warmth of people who believe they are gathered to celebrate. Sandra wore pale gold. She was luminous. Julian had known she would be. He played his role with precision, filling glasses, asking after people's journeys, squeezing Sandra's hand when she glanced at him across the table. He was gracious and present, and to everyone in that room, completely, entirely fine. He waited until the first course had been cleared. Then he stood. The table fell quiet. He thanked both families for being there. He said something true, that building things was the work he had given his life to, the company, the reputation, the trust that made both of those possible. He said that you couldn't build anything that lasted on a foundation you hadn't tested, that the cost of not testing, in his experience, was always higher than the cost of knowing. He spoke quietly, without accusation, the way a man speaks when the grief has already been processed and what remains is simply clarity. He set his phone on the table, face up, and pressed play. Sandra's voice filled the room. "Julian is security. You are the rest of my life. 4 more weeks and I'll have both." The room went utterly still. Sandra's color left her face in a single moment, as cleanly as a light going out. Her mother's eyes dropped to the tablecloth. Someone, Julian thought it was his aunt, said Luca's name under her breath, almost a reflex, as though the word had escaped before she could stop it. Marco, at the far end of the table, was very still, staring into his glass. Julian reached into his jacket pocket. He placed the engagement ring on the table in front of Sandra, gently, without ceremony, the way you set down something that is no longer yours to carry. He looked at her, with the full weight of everything he knew and the full dignity of a man who had decided some time ago that he would not be made small by any of this. "I ran the test to prove you were who I believed you to be. You weren't. I hope you find what you're actually looking for." He buttoned his jacket. He nodded once to both sides of the table, and he walked out. The door closed behind him. The silence in the room held, complete, terrible, the kind that no one present would ever quite be able to describe afterwards, except to say that they had never heard anything quite so loud. 2 days later, Clara knocked on his door. He had expected her. He opened it and stepped back to let her in without a word. She sat on the sofa with her coat still on, the way she had the last time, and he sat across from her in the reading chair, and neither of them spoke for a moment. Then he told her everything. The gallery photo, Marco's name in the image, the full architecture of what had been built around him, and Clara's place inside it. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform anger. He had none left for her. What remained was something more like the quiet sadness of a man closing a door that had been open a long time. "I'm not angry at you, Clara. You chose the wrong person to be loyal to, and you've had to live with watching what that choice built. That's already its own consequence." Clara's eyes filled. She started to speak. He held up one hand, not harshly, just a signal that what she wanted to say would not change what needed to happen next. He told her that he couldn't maintain the friendship, not because she was a bad person, but because every time he looked at her, he would remember the 2 years she had spent passing his schedule to a woman who had used it to run a second life alongside his. That memory was not something he was willing to carry in the face of a friend. He stood. He held the door open. She walked out. He closed it quietly behind her. Clara stood alone in the hallway for a long time and understood, in the particular silence of a closed door, that there is no such thing as being harmlessly complicit, that the distance between being used and choosing not to ask questions is no distance at all. He went to the office on a Thursday morning, earlier than Marco. He set the legal folder on the boardroom table and sat down. When Marco arrived and saw him there, something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise, more the look of a man who has been waiting for a particular conversation and has just learned that it is today. He sat down across from Julian. He looked at the folder. Julian slid it across the table without a word. Marco opened it. He read the first page, then the second. Julian watched him read, the slight tightening around the eyes, the moment when Marco understood that this was not a draft, not an opening position, not an invitation to negotiate. It was done. Julian's signature was already on it. The valuation was full and fair. The exit was clean. Marco looked up. He opened his mouth. Julian raised one hand. "I know exactly what you did. I know when you knew it. I know why you waited. I don't need an explanation. I need a signature." Marco held his gaze. For a long moment he said nothing. Julian said nothing. The city moved outside the glass behind them, unhurried and indifferent. Then Marco looked down. He picked up the pen. He signed. Julian took the folder, closed it, and slid it into his bag. He stood. He did not offer a handshake. He did not say goodbye. He walked through the office, past the desks they had chosen together, past the logo on the wall they had argued about for 3 weeks, past 11 years of something he had believed was partnership, and out through the front door. The air outside was cool. The city moved around him, continuous and unchanged, completely unbothered by what had just ended 40 floors above. He stood on the pavement for a moment. He now owned the company outright. The people who had used him as the foundation for their own plans, Sandra, Luca, Marco, even Clara in her quieter way, had all left in reaching for something that was his with more than he'd had before. Not more money, not more success, more clarity, more ground, more of himself than he had known to look for. Some tests are never meant to be run, but when the results come back, and they always do, the only choice left is what you do with the truth. Julian didn't destroy anyone. He simply stopped protecting the people who never protected him, and in the wreckage of everything they built on lies, he finally found the solid ground he had been standing on all along.